Meta is stealing your money and you don't even realize it. And it's not just Meta, it's Google, it's Klaviyo, it's TikTok. And the more platforms you use, the worse it gets. Have you ever woken up, looked at your ad accounts, and seen the ROAS is great, only to feel a punch in the gut when you look at your Shopify revenue? You're not alone. Bad attribution data hits everyone. 9-figure brands pull their hair out every single day trying to find a solution. But it doesn't have to be this way. Attribution is e-com's free card Monty, and today I'm going to teach you how you can stop getting scammed. By the end of this video, you'll feel confident enough to scale your ad spend, knowing that the money is going in the right place at the right time. A good scam is like a magic trick. It follows a story. And this is the story of attribution. Say a customer sees a Meta ad and is tempted to buy. They go onto the site and look into it a bit more. Maybe they like what they see, but they're not ready to buy just yet. It could be that their partner was looking to try and buy something similar and they're just not sure if this is the right product. They mention the product to their partner Googles it, they click the Google Ads link, and then they make a purchase like that. Who should be given the credit? Meta or Google? In this case, it's obvious that Meta should get the sale. But more often than not, they'll both get the credit. This problem only gets worse when you add more platforms into the mix. Klaviyo certainly won't say no to a little bit of extra tracked revenue. This is the essential problem with attribution, and it's a problem that billion-dollar companies haven't solved. It's industry-wide. Fundamentally, it's an issue of imperfect data. And it's the same if you're trying to drive sales with Meta ads or hiring a guy to spin a sign on the street. The truth is, there's no single solution for attribution. Google and Apple have actually implemented policies and tech that makes it harder to track, so it's here to stay. And you can't afford to leave this money on the table. Do you really want to give Zuck more money than you have to? And it doesn't matter how good you are. If you get an imperfect data, you're making imperfect decisions. Peter Drucker said it best: what gets measured gets managed. And if you're leaving your data up to chance, you're going to get beaten by anyone who knows how to manipulate that data. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. There's no simple solution, but there are some hacks to make sure you make the most out of your data. Now, I didn't come into this information the easy way. This is tried and tested through hundreds of brands which I've worked with and tens of brands which I've owned myself. Now, I've applied the same framework to help brands scale from 6 to 7 to 8 figures. I've learned these skills from the ground up, and it's helped me get results, such as scaling a brand from 70K a month to 700K a month in the first month of working with them. It also helped me scale a brand from 5K in monthly revenue to 2 million in monthly revenue in just 13 months. Now, I'm not affiliated with any particular software. I'm doing this because I want everyone to understand the problems of attribution and how to avoid them. Now, the first solution is universal. It applies for every single business in e-com. And honestly, it shouldn't even be considered a solution. It's a necessity. It's the bones of every successful business. Ultimately, the problem with attribution is you're gonna get lost in that data. If you try to mix complex with complex, you're gonna end up confusing yourself with junk data. When data is complex, you gotta go simple. And that's what we're gonna do. No fancy tricks, just a simple approach to data which gives the best results with the least effort. And if there's one thing you take away from this video, let it be this. And you'll be surprised by how much of an effect it actually has. Having a framework of easily actionable and easy to access key metrics makes it so much easier to scale and stops you getting caught in the weeds. Overfishing out of fear is the number one thing which stops businesses from scaling. Focusing on survival is the first step to failure. You need to focus on one thing only: scaling. What I'm about to show you is my metric tier list, so you can focus on the important metrics and not get lost in the junk ones. All right, so first metric we're gonna go with ad spend. Super important. If you spend more money, that's really important for your business. It's also a definite metric. It's 100% accurate. There's no fluff here. S tier metric. AMER, this is acquisition MER. If you work this out by doing new customer revenue divided by ad spend, it's as hard as nails. You can't go wrong with it. There's no fluff here, and it shows you how much you're spending on acquiring new customers. Super, super important metric. You should look at this every day. A tier. The only reason it's not S tier is because it's subsidiary. It's part of a larger system. I'll explain more of that later. COGS. This is often overlooked by brands. Brands try and save money in all sorts of places. Ad spend, staff. But realistically, their biggest cost is going to be COGS. So they should try and save more money here. S tier. It's also guaranteed no fluff. Next one, comp margin. This is going to go above everything else. This is the most important metric. You should focus on this. Number one, it's basically profit on variable costs. The reason why this is so important is you can work out your day-to-day profit without having to do fixed costs or anything like that. And then you can actually see how much money is going into your bank account every day. It's basically a factor of all your costs, your revenue, and your ad spend. It's a true metric, and it literally just shows how much money is going into your bank account. Super important. And this is literally the fundamental goal of a business, is to maximize profit. Contribution margin is a factor of that. Google Ads, ROAS. This metric is actually probably the most junk ROAS there is. The reason why is because it most likely contains loads and loads of brand search terms. As I mentioned earlier in the example, it's going to be taking up so much of the purchases, which is not really contributing much for. Anyone who searches your brand and clicks on that first link, no matter all of the stuff which came before that search, Google is going to take credit for. So when you look at Google ROAS, one, you need to take that into account, and two, you need to take into account the people who are just searching your brand and basically take that out of the equation. But what you can't do is stop spending on your brand because other brands are spending on your brand and they're going to steal your customers. It's a necessary evil. NCAC. This is going up in the A tier next to AMR. It's basically the same thing as AMR, but it's new customer acquisition cost. Basically, this number will give you more insight on how much you're paying for new customers. Next up, returning customers and returning customer percentage. Now, one of them is good and one of them is bad. Returning customer percentage is completely useless. You can't look at this number. I know Shopify shows it to you, and the reason why it's useless is if your goal is to grow, or if you want to grow, then you need to acquire new customers. So therefore, returning customer percent going down is a good thing. And a lot of brands will try and get returning customer percentage to go up. That means they're providing a good service, right? But wrong, because if you're acquiring new customers, you want to see this number go down. What we should actually be looking at is returning customers as just a net number. If your returning customers go up each month, or they go up in a pattern which is increasing every year on year, then this is great. This is a B tier metric because it's just a factor of like a larger thing, but it's still super important, and it's basically what you should be looking at instead of returning customer percentage. Revenue, super important. You want to make more money. Revenue is a factor of you making more money. Revenue minus ad spend minus COGS is basically how much money you're going to make, contribution margin. Revenue needs to go up with ad spend. If they don't go up together, or if revenue goes down and ad spend goes up, this is bad. This is why it isn't as good as contribution margin. Revenue going up is not necessarily a good thing, but revenue going down is pretty much always a bad thing, unless you're increasing contribution margin in that process and it's part of a longer term strategy. Next up, we got Meta and TikTok ROAS. These ROASs are better than Google's because there's significantly less of the branded terms in there, and there's also significantly less of stealing from other platforms. These are usually the first point of call for a lot of brands. It's either ads or organic. They're rarely searching brands up on TikTok or Facebook to find them there, and so it's a great introduction. But these are more important than Google, but still, the reason why they're C tier is they're not true. As I explained earlier in the video, there's no accuracy, there's no reliability to these. They're all gonna wanna try and take credit for every single sale they can. And actually, a high ROAS doesn't necessarily mean a good thing, and a low ROAS doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. A high ROAS can be bad because you're not spending enough money and you're just targeting customers who are either already gonna buy or they're just old returning customers. Whereas a low ROAS might be good because you're actually acquiring more contribution margin overall by spending more money. AOV, super important metric, but less important than people think. You shouldn't be worrying about this too much. Basically, depends on your merchandising, depends what you're targeting. But higher AOV, generally a good thing. If you can have the same amount of purchases and get them to spend more each time, that's great. But be careful because you got to watch out for conversion rate. A higher AOV usually means conversion rate goes down. Are both of them in sync, moving together? Just make sure it's working. Customer lifetime value. This is a super important metric because it's basically how much money you're going to make in the long term. It's basically revenue, but it's delayed over the course of a year. If you know these numbers, that'll help you spend more money and acquire customers at a larger cost. You got to remember, the person who can spend the most to acquire a customer is who's going to win. If you can spend more money than your competitors on acquiring a customer, you can therefore spend more money, you can make more ads. So it's really, really important to do that. Lifetime value is based on how good your product is, your retention marketing, and how good you are at getting people to come back and buy again. The biggest brands have the best lifetime value, but some products aren't fit for it, so you can ignore this quite a lot of the time. I want to point out some pretty junk metric. Now, a lot of brands come to me and they're just like, we need our sessions to go up. I tell them, ignore. Basically, I can bring you junk traffic to your website and increase your sessions. It's a completely useless metric. Most of the time, when you come onto brands which aren't performing well, you're actually going to reduce their sessions because you're bringing more high quality customers over. If your contribution margin goes up and your sessions go down, this is a good thing. And a lot of brands, especially VC-backed brands, focus on sessions. They think it's a sign that it's popular or a brand's doing well, but it literally means nothing. You can bring over millions and millions of people, but if they're not going to buy, it's completely pointless. Another pointless metric, desktop versus mobile. Unless you're like really in the weeds and you're designing landing pages for mobile, designing landing pages for desktop, this is completely pointless metric. I see a lot of brands looking at it, try and make decisions based on it. Just stop it. First, order value over CAC. I think basically you should ignore this unless you're like an 8-figure brand. It's basically very similar to AMA and NCAC. I think it's just going to confuse anyone more than anything else. But if you're really in the weeds and you're looking at stuff, then it's a good metric to look at. Basically, if you're a brand looking to scale, you should focus on the S and A tier metrics only. This will give you a clear guidance on how to scale. You want to try and increase contribution margin, increase revenue, increase ad spend, decrease COGS, whilst also keeping a healthy business, which is acquiring new customers and returning customers are going up. It's as simple as that. And how you do that is dependent on how good the ads you're making are, how good your product is. And that's fundamentally it. All the other stuff is just a distraction.